I am now in my mid 30s. Don't talk about it very much because I do look relatively young. But I've been in this fitness game for a very long time. I have been lifting since I was 16 years old, which means that the amount of time that I have been spending training, lifting, is adulthood status on its own, over 18 years. So I wanted to talk a little bit today about the right habits, the right systems, the right processes that you should put in place in your 20s so that you can set yourself up to succeed in your 30s, in your 40s, in your 50s, and of course, all the way on to the rest of your life. So I think that the first big thing that really people should invest in early on in life is figuring out the right training principles. Which is to say that when I look back on the amount of time that it took me to really figure out how to be a good lifter, how to be a good trainer, how to be a good coach, is it really took me quite a long time. It took me, I would say, about 10 or 15 years of lifting experience before I really had a good handle on training alone. And then even after that, I would say that I was not really an expert in terms of dietary principles. That really took a little bit longer. And obviously now here I am, about 20 years into it. And, I certainly know a lot more than I used to. There's also still obviously a lot more for me to learn over time. I certainly don't pretend to know everything. And of course, this also involved probably, I would say, the first 5 years or so of my training where I was basically just spinning my wheels. I was not really seeing much of any results because I didn't really know what I was doing. And so I would say that the biggest, easiest cheat code that you have is relying on the knowledge of others rather than trying to do it all yourself. Because of course I did it, right? I trial and errored my way through learning all the information that I needed to know. And again, it took me like 10, 15 years. If you want to be a really good lifter, if you want to be healthier, if you want to be in great shape, and you want to set yourself up for long-term success, well, of course, it's going to be easy if you get a jump start early on in the process. That could be hiring a coach, that could be hiring a personal trainer, that could be spending a lot of time, reading blogs, looking into resources, and so on. And realistically, I would say that basically the way that it worked for me is that I spent maybe the first 5 years or so spinning my wheels. I ended up getting a personal training certification. That really kind of started my journey into really paying attention. And then, about 2-3 years after that, I really spent a lot of time focusing on reading as much as I could, reading a lot of blogs and so on. And that was really where I got a lot of the important theoretical and practical knowledge that I needed. Of course, in combination with working with clients, which gave me a lot of hands-on practical real-world experience. If I had had a coach early on, it would have saved me so much time. It would have made things so much easier. If I had really started learning and digging into the research a lot sooner, that would have also saved me a lot of time. At the end of the day, there are definitely a lot of things that I could have done better. That's not to say, of course, that you need to take the high cost route, which is obviously like paying a coach or a trainer to handle everything for you. And of course, just picking their brain a lot. Yes, obviously that can work really well if you have the money to spare, but if you are young and you don't have the money to spare, there's plenty of free stuff out there on the internet. I would say a lot more free stuff than there used to be. There's also a lot of garbage out there, but part of the thing is you start learning, you start researching, you're going to start sorting the good stuff from the bad stuff over time anyway, just based on experience. The next big piece of advice that I would give you if you are in your 20s is you need to think of things as investing in your future. You need to think of things not in terms of, okay, I want to, have a shredded six-pack this summer. You need to think in things in terms of, okay, am I going to be happy? Am I going to be healthy 20 years from now, 40 years from now? Because you have your whole life ahead of you. And if you set up the right habits early on, it gets way easier to maintain them over time versus, say somebody who doesn't really take care of their physical health at all for the first 30, 40 years of their life. And then they start aging, they start having injuries, they start having issues, and then they really need to then, play catch up. And it's really a lot more effort to pick that stuff up later on in life than it is to start when you are young. So when you start when you are young, you can think of it as investing in your future. It's really just the same, as in personal finance. In personal finance, it's like, okay, you set aside a bit of your paycheck every month to pay down debts or to build up, a base savings pot or to invest, right? It's the exact same thing when it comes to your fitness. You need to think of every workout that you get in as a little investment in your future health and your future fitness, and not in terms of necessarily just the short-term goals that you are trying to accomplish. Now, of course, when you are young, I will also say that that is your time to really pursue athletic goals, right? That's your time to say, okay, I want to be big, I want to be jacked, I want to run really fast, I want to jump really high. Those are obviously pursuits that you can, follow pretty easily when you are young, because again, like you're young, you recover quickly, and you can push yourself hard, and you can see those kinds of results. When you get a bit older, yes, of course, you can still push it, you can still continue to progress, but the risk associated starts to increase. So when you are, say, 20 years old, you get a really nasty injury, you can bounce back from it pretty quickly. It's not going to impact your lifting career too much. If you have the same thing happen when you are 40 or 60, well, potentially that's going to be a lot more of an issue in both the short term and the long term from that point. So I think that when you're young, it's great to push things hard, to really push for these sort of aesthetic goals, these sort of strength goals, these sort of performance goals, because they are, a natural suit for you. But as you get older, there becomes this sort of balance, right? Between, just how much time you have to train, how much effort you have to put into train, and just what you're going to get out of it. What you're going to get out of it slowly, goes down, trickles down every single year. And again, that's not to say that it's a death sentence where, you hit your 30s, you hit your 40s, and suddenly everything falls apart and, it's all downhill. No, of course, you can maintain, you can be much healthier than the next person simply by continuing to train consistently. But at the same time, the reality is that yes, you are going to see your fitness slowly decrease over time, despite all your best efforts to maintain everything. And that means that sooner or later, it is not going to make sense anymore for you to continue to try to pursue those young person athletic goals. That risk-reward ratio is simply just not favorable. And so that follows into my next point, which is that I want to talk about how it is a marathon and not a sprint. When you are young, everything feels like a sprint. You want to do things in the short term. You want to do things quickly. You want to do things fast. And that's great, and it can accomplish a lot. But in the long term, as you get older, you need to start thinking about things in terms of that marathon, right? You need to think in terms of slow and steady as opposed to fast and intense. I remember when I was younger, and I really used to think that I needed to push myself super freaking hard in order to get results. So what that would mean is, I might do things like, okay, I heard that Arnold Schwarzenegger used to train 2 times a day, so I'm going to train 2 times a day. Oh, I heard that, you've got to do, 3 sets minimum, but maybe you could do 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 sets, right? I used to always push to do more and more work, and I used to spend many hours in the gym. I also used to do things that I would say realistically probably were not good for my overall health, in terms of things like I would sometimes work out really, really late at night. I would work out at midnight instead of sleeping. My sleep schedule was not always great. I did not really focus on or prioritize my sleep health. I would often train way too frequently. I got myself hurt a lot and still kept trying to train. I did a lot of stuff when I was young because I was so convinced that I had to push things super hard. And ultimately, what I saw in the research is that ultimately that's really not necessary. The reality is that, basically, yes, you do get more results per unit of exercise, but at the same time, you get less and less relative results. So there are diminishing returns to additional effort. So what that means is, let's say that I want to improve my bench press, right? Basically the first set of a bench press that I do per week is going to provide a pretty massive stimulus relative to obviously 0 sets of training the bench press. Then I do, 3 sets. Obviously, that gives me maybe 20% more. Great. Then I do, say 6 sets. It's maybe that's 5, 10% more. 10 sets. Maybe that's a few percentage points more, right? The point is that you can keep training more and more, and you will keep getting more and more results, but there are such strong diminishing returns that it really isn't worth it after a certain point, because you're basically pushing it harder and harder and harder for less and less result out of it. And so that creates this split between people who focus on what you would call the maximalist approach, which is basically just like do as much as you can, train as hard as you can. You want to squeeze every single percentage point that you can out of things, and the minimalist approach, which is to say, okay, don't worry about pushing it super hard. Train maybe 3 days a week, do a certain number of sets, and just focus on continuing to do that in the long run. And the reality is that the minimalist approach can still get you almost, not the same results, but say something like 80, 90% of the results, right? And if you can get 80, 90% of the results by training, say, half as much, it's like, obviously you can see the trade-off there, right? When you're young, when you've got a lot of time, when you've got a lot of energy, you might say, okay, yeah, I want to train the maximalist style because all I care about is maximizing my strength, maximizing the amount of muscle that I build. But when you get a bit older, you've got responsibilities, you've got a job, you've got kids, you've got whatever else going on in your life. And again, that risk reward, a little bit less favorable. And so ultimately what I realized is that my life personally is way better when I made the shift to the minimalist approach. I continue to get stronger. I continue to build more muscle mass. I am now stronger than I was in my 20s officially, starting to hit record lifts again. And this is while training only 3 times a week. I used to train 6 or 7 days a week. I used to push myself all the time thinking that that's what I needed to do. I didn't need to do that, and I wasted a lot of time doing that. So what I would say is also, again, when you're young, you think that you need to push super hard to get results. You don't. When you're older, when you have a bit more experience, you realize really what matters is training, maybe not the hardest in the world, but being consistent about it and doing the right kind of training and doing that over a long period of time. The fact that I train now 3 days a week, much less time spent in the gym, but I get better results, but I get stronger. To me, that's a win-win in every possible situation. And it gives me a lot more time to do things like make these videos for you, manage my clients, manage my business, manage my life, relax. A lot of that stuff becomes a lot more important to me as I get older. And the last thing that I want to talk about today is that as you get older, you'll start to see a very stark difference between people who are training consistently, people who are in shape, and people who are not. I am in my mid-30s. You probably look at me and go, yeah, you look like in your mid-30s, right? Whatever. But I also see a massive range of difference between me and other people who are in my age group who are not generally in shape, who are not generally training. There is a huge difference. And I'm not even just talking about like weight. I'm not taking weight as a marker of healthiness here. I am literally just talking about, I see people who are my same age who look like they could be pushing 50. I am talking about just, there is a huge, huge difference. There's a huge variation between people who take care of their bodies and people who don't. And, basically, so long as you start early and you keep things consistent, you can maintain your health, again, much longer, much steadier, much less drop off over time as you age. And that is something that will become more and more evident to you the older that you get. So when you're young, again, you can get away with all kinds of stuff. You can get away with a bad diet. You can get away with bad training or not training at all, or, just playing video games or, terrible sleep schedule, whatever, right? You can get away with that stuff because you're young. And everyone mostly looks the same. Everyone mostly looks, the same age when you're young. But you start to see that divergence over time as you get older. And so I would just caution you, like, hey, be aware of that. Be aware that that's going to happen. You'll probably start to see it just a little bit in your 20s, not very much. It starts to become a lot more evident in your 30s, becomes very evident in your 40s, and your 50s and beyond. So I hope that these lessons are useful to you. If you are in your 20s, if you are a young person who is looking to manage your health long term, perhaps you can avoid some of the mistakes that I have made. So that is all for today's video. As always, don't hesitate to like, comment, subscribe, smash that notification bell. Comment down below, let me know what you would like to see in future videos. Have a good week. I will talk to you all in the next video.